I have the big pleasure to introduce now our keynote speaker, Joe McCannon from the US. And with so many incredible people we have here, you are maybe wondering why I asked Joe to give a keynote speech. And
I'm wondering too.
the reason is that this is quite an out-of-the-box conference. And Joe is a perfect testimonial because he's a very out-of-the-box thinker. And he's the founder of the Billions Institute of Shared Nation, two interesting experiments in democracy over the borders. And so I'm very pleased to have him here, honored, and I will give him the floor. Please, Joe.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you very much. Let's see, I just want to make sure that I can project the slides here. Is this okay? Okay. All right. Yeah, so thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to be here, especially excited because, as I've shared with a few people, Apulia is actually the region in Italy that my grandfather's side of the family comes from, in a little village in Foggia, so it feels a little bit like a homecoming to me. And although, of course, I wish I could speak to you in Italian, which I'm unable to do, so I suppose I'm a typical American in that respect. I'm also excited to be here because I expect to learn a lot from all of you who are fellow travelers in this space. And so I'm really looking forward to the next 24 hours and the opportunity to hear your feedback and your critique. We're a pretty early stage venture here, so I hope you sharpen your knives and don't hold back at all in terms of your feedback as I speak. I'm actually relatively new to the space of civic engagement and global democracy. I've had a pretty traditional career. I've worked as a consultant, I've worked in foundations, I've worked as an appointee in the American government, and I just sort of had a kind of predictable, safe, comfortable career going, and then something happened to me. I became uncomfortable with some things in the world around me and in the work that I was doing. And it started actually during my time in the government. And I want to be clear, I view my time serving in the US government as having been a privilege. I worked in the Obama administration, obviously a very different administration from the current administration. And I was very honored to serve the president, and I worked alongside some very dedicated, very bright, intelligent people. And came away believing that good government can accomplish very good things, especially in spheres like education and healthcare where I worked. But I also became uneasy in the course of my work in the government, and I became uneasy because I looked at global commons problems like climate change, like species loss and ecosystem loss, like gross global inequity. And I realized that the government that I was a part of wasn't particularly well equipped, wasn't really agile enough to address those concerns, and really wasn't particularly interested, or was maybe too self-interested. I don't think it's a radical thing to say in a room like this one that, our current democracies are not always very responsive to emergent concerns and new ideas from people. And so, I felt like it was a time to look for something different. But it was initially just kind of a despondent time. I found myself talking to friends, and the subtext of all of our conversations when we talked about climate or when we talked about global problems was, we feel powerless. There's really very little we can do to change the world. And one of my friends said to me very memorably, it's like I'm watching a car crash that's about to happen and there's nothing I can do about it. And I think a lot of us feel that way at this moment in time. So Shared Nation is an attempt to respond to that. It's a bit grandiose, it's a bit quixotic. I own all of those things for sure, but it's an attempt to say, yes, we're in seriously difficult times. On the other hand, We're more connected and have more technological infrastructure than we ever could have imagined 20 or 30 years ago. And we have an opportunity to combine now in ways that we never could have imagined combining before. And that's what's at the heart of this idea, is combination, is coming together as we never have before with our resources and with our time to actually try to change things in the world around us. That's at the heart of this idea. And of course, you know, I think you need look no further than what's happening in the US right now to sort of see some reasons for optimism. This was the Women's March. I was a part of a similar march like this just a few weeks ago, the March for Our Lives, organized by young students around the country who are appalled at our elected leaders' inability to do anything related to gun control, rightly so. And so you can sort of see these sparks where historically disenfranchised groups are becoming a little bit more engaged, where younger people are certainly becoming more engaged. And so, you know, I think there's some reason for hope. A specific example that was very encouraging to me personally came in the election in 2016, before we elected the terrible, dangerous, incompetent person we've elected now. But this was the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, whose fundraising was mainly, in this graphic, over 80% from donations of under $200. So you start to see sort of people who maybe feel disenfranchised and outside the process feeling like they can aggregate their activity and do bigger things together. And so this, for me, actually was a little bit of a turning point in my mind where I said, something seems to be happening here that could be different. But, you know, while I think that innovations to current models of democracy are great, making our current institutions work better is an absolutely terrific enterprise, and there are wonderful organizations all around the world doing that, what I've become more interested in is new ways of combining, new ways of coming together that are complementary to traditional democratic structures. One such example comes from a project that was written about recently in the Atlantic, a project called Kulturland in Germany, where people are making very small donations, combining them to buy up land together, and putting that land into organic farming or putting that land into protection, which I think is the beginning of an interesting movement. You know, people are giving maybe a few hundred euros and then aggregating that to make these huge purchases. So that's kind of the idea. That's the same spirit that's behind the Shared Nation platform. Shared Nation's vision is to build a perpetual engine for group co-investment in solutions to global commons problems involving all people. And let me parse that statement a little bit. Perpetual engine refers to the idea that what we get people to do in Shared Nation is to combine their money together every month. People pool what they have every month, and then they make a decision about what to do with that. Co-investment refers to the idea that this isn't sort of a version 1.0 crowdfunding platform where people give their money to lots of diffuse projects and ideas, and people can sort of give to anything that's listed. We force ourselves to make a decision every month. We force ourselves as a group to come to a shared choice about what we'll do so that we can combine our money and have more clout with that money. So it's a very intentional decision. It's about saying we get more power by coming together than by sort of running off with our own particular agendas. And involving all people refers to the fact that, you know, certainly giving circles and funds, donor-advised funds and things of that sort have existed for years. Wealthy people, independently wealthy people combine their funds often to do fun and interesting projects together. But Shared Nation's idea is that we do that for the general public at a small dollar level. People make micro donations and then in aggregate have more impact together. And these are the kinds of impact that we're interested in. So large land purchases, infrastructure purchases, buying energy infrastructure or climate change mitigation infrastructure, investing in new technologies. We had, in one of our rounds, the group decided to invest in something called solar roadways. Solar roadways is basically an asphalt that contains solar panels, and so the roads themselves become sources of energy. And that's being prototyped now out in the western United States. Buying out bad corporate actors, responding to emergencies. These are the kinds of things we aspire to do with our combined funds and our combined clout in this community. Here is very specifically how it works. People join for a minimum of $2 a month, so this is the individual user experience. They learn about exciting investment opportunities in a specific topic area. So this month we're working on fake news, on media manipulation. So people are voting on projects that relate to helping the public consume media more thoughtfully, fact-checking the media. And we'll actually tomorrow we'll be selecting our winner for the round that's focused in that area. But we've done rounds on climate change, women's rights and gender justice. We have a round coming up on youth-led movements, a round coming up on oceans. These are the kinds of things that the group wants to work on. And then we have a fun, fast voting process, which is really the key to the experience, which I want to tell you about. And people have this satisfaction of gaining clout by combining their resources. For the candidate causes, the organizations or technology companies or conglomerates who seek our funds, they get guaranteed minimal funding for taking part. So even though there's one big winner that takes roughly 80% of our funds, all of the other organizations split the balance. So there's a strong impetus to come and to join and to be active in the process. They gain great exposure, and then they compete for that monthly pot. The key question, though, the question that you're probably asking yourselves is, well, this is all good and fine, but how would you possibly do that? Because if we've got thousands of people choosing between hundreds of causes, what would be an efficient way for the group to actually make decisions month to month about what they want to do together? And that's the reason that we really started Shared Nation is we began to get interested in a pairwise voting approach, a pairwise voting platform where the way it works is that each member of our community, each individual in the community, in the preliminary phases, the first 3 weeks of every month, makes choices but just between a few pairs of organizations that are competing for our funds. And in making those choices, what we do is we aggregate the group's preferences very quickly. So if all of us in this room chose between 4 or 5 different projects or 4 or 5 different causes, we could quickly get a sense of where the group stands and create a rank order of the projects that we think are the most important. Then what we do is we take the top 8 highest ranked causes or organizations or projects, and we vote, everyone in the community votes on each and every one of those projects. Here's an example of a vote, so people are, they're presented with 4 or 5 options like this each week, and they help us essentially winnow things down. So we're apportioning the work in the community to make better decisions. And this puts us in a position to move pretty fast in deciding what to fund. I'll say that this is underpinned by a very pedigreed science of sampling. That's what this rests on, so it's sound, we believe. We think it has the potential to do exciting things going forward in the future. Our aim is that by the end of 2019, we will become the world's biggest giving circle. Giving circle, by definition, is a group of people that come together on an ongoing basis and combine their funds and make decisions about what to do with those funds. Historically, giving circles have been capped out at 300 people, 400 people, 500 people at most because of the problem of deliberation and decision making. It's just too many people to make a fast decision. It usually takes them 6 months or a year to come to a decision. And often there's a buy-in, so you have to give a minimum of $1,000 in most American giving circles to even be allowed to be involved in the process. So this lower cost for participating avoids that happening. And this is kind of the trajectory that we imagine. We want to be the world's biggest giving circle by the end of 2019. We want to act as a people's foundation with 50,000 people by 2022. And then this is the origin of the name. We want to kind of be a small nation, have that many people by 2025. And this, of course, is where Susanna is right. It starts to sound very quixotic and grandiose and maybe even a bit crazy if I'm to listen to my friends and family. But, we're coming into this with our eyes open. So we have organizations, large funding platforms in the US that we're in relationship with that are studying what we're doing, so that if we're successful and if this user experience is a high value user experience, if people enjoy it, if they get satisfaction from it, which seems to be the case, then bigger platforms that already have 5 million or 10 million or 15 million people on them can use the platform to democratize their voting process in turn. The other thing I'll say is that we're having a big debate internally right now, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, about whether we should begin to take funding from private foundations to add to our monthly pot. So there are private foundations who have expressed some interest and said, we'd like to put some money into your pool because we are excited about people getting engaged on a particular topic, on relationship violence or oceans or whatever it happens to be. So can we match your pool? If you have $50,000 in a giving month, can we make it $100,000 in exchange for some publicity and getting people to know more about the work we're doing? And it's a question, right? Because that is sort of the equivalent of a super donor coming in and changing things. They certainly would only get one vote, so it's not as if they'd have more influence, but there's still a question of whether the composition of the community changes and whether our own mentality changes and shifts away from serving the people to serving the interests of these moneyed foundations. Here's a quick progress statement for us. So we spent 2015 and 2016 doing small prototypes, very basic prototypes. We built a platform in 2017 and ran 2 prototypes with, I think the first was with 200 people, the second with about 800 people. And then we've launched a full monthly subscription service as of March 2018. And so far, the response has been terrific. The average user score for the experience is 9.1 out of 10. The Net Promoter Score, if you're interested in those things, is 71, which is a pretty robust score. So we're feeling optimistic. We're feeling like we've created an experience that's satisfying. And what people are telling us is not only do they have the satisfaction of clout, of combination, of being able to do more with their money because they come together with others, but they're getting educated in the process. So this month, I think people came into the month of April feeling pretty helpless and frustrated when it comes to media manipulation. In the US, we're in the throes of all of this news coverage right now about Facebook and what happened in the 2016 elections. And I think people now feel more empowered and more savvy based on the education that they got through the process of voting on I think it was roughly 40 organizations that were vying for our funds. So that's really it in a nutshell. I wanted to be efficient and just give you a sense of the idea. I guess the last thing I would say to you is please join us and please try the platform. If you give me your business card, or if you'd like to, I suppose, give Susanna permission to share your email with us, we can sign you up for a free trial, no problem at all. And I ask for that, in part because we want more people to be a part of the community, but also because we are in an experimental phase still. This is still early days, and I think from a design standpoint, it's critically important that this be co-owned by the members of the community, and that we continue to develop it through input from members of the community. If it's white privileged people from the northeast part of the United States, that's a terrible way to start a community and to start to build a global network. And so we want to be very active and very intentional about involving others. We've just identified a group of advisors who come from every continent. We've got a group of fellows who will be announced tomorrow who are very diverse in their makeup, and that's part of what we're doing, is intentionally trying to grow a community that really represents the world more than I think some of us do. So I'll stop there and just say thank you for listening to this mad, crazy idea. Thank you. Actually, I want to say one more thing, which is the app is free. So you can download the app for free on iTunes or on the Google Store, and that seems to be the way that most people like to do it first.
Thank you, Joe. If I can add just a few words. I joined because I have a 12-year-old environmental activist in my family, and he enjoyed a lot the march round on carbon emissions, and he was excited that the reforestation project he voted for at the beginning was the winner in the end. So I just want to underline that this could be a great educational tool, because kids can learn that they own the world and the solutions. So.
And I would say, I mean, that's actually a part of our strategy is to start with youth. We've really been focusing on youth engagement. We had a young person say to us, the thing I want to do most in my life is vote. And of course, if you're under 18 in the United States, you can't vote. And so here's an opportunity every month to vote, and lo and behold, you get to decide what happens with thousands of dollars. So.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Susanna, because it's quite extraordinary to learn about all of this here in Lecce, you know, coming from Rome to Lecce, to hear about such a fantastic endeavor. Exactly, I agree. My question is regards the projects themselves and the selection of the projects. What sort of due diligence is actually carried out by you guys to eventually select one or another?
Yeah, at this point, I would say the due diligence is minimal, but a change is coming. And I'll tell you the story of why a change is coming. So the due diligence at this point is an organization has to be an established entity that is able to accept funds. So it has to be a nonprofit, or it could be an LLC, but it has to be some entity that can actually take our funds. It has to be willing to describe itself and its work, or it has to be nominated by a member of our community. But we've had a few, I would say, worrying experiences recently where we had organizations that appeared to be legitimate organizations that had agendas that only became apparent to us after we had experts in the field really study the organizations that were competing. So as a first check, we now have an expert in the field review the pool of applicants each time to determine whether there's anything concerning. But I think increasingly we'll actually have a sort of a more formal application and due diligence process, probably by the fall of this year. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I invite, we have one more question. Yes, please.
Yes, if I may. Thank you very much, Joe. We were discussing just in the lunch about his project, which is a great project. But you know, a number of questions came to me when we were discussing, and one of these is related to the question that was just asked about due diligence and about the ethics of you know, implementing this sort of brilliant project. The way of choosing, because democracy, it's fine, but you know, we're living times where democracy is being used for all sorts of purposes, and you know, we are being flooded by fake news, bad information, propaganda that is forming the decisions, that is informing and forming the decision-making processes at both the individual levels and the collective levels. So going back to the issue of due diligence, I'm also in the business of taking, well, I work for the UN. I'll give a presentation tomorrow. I'll give a presentation tomorrow. So I'm in the business of taking international standards, if you want, to places where they are not always fully applied. So, and the question has come to me a number of times: are we doing the right thing? Is this the right thing to do business, or we should, rather than conducting these very expensive criminal trials, we should be building schools and hospitals and you know. So I have a problem, an issue with two things. First, the ethics of the project, in that how you control this aspect, the choosing the project, the due diligence. We have very strict rules in this regard in the UN. We have something called the Human Rights Due Diligence Policy that we have to apply in every project that we undertake. And then also the way the people are informed, formed, and educated about making choices, which is something very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you, Ignacio. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to note, which should have been part of my answer to the earlier question, is we do sort of, as I said now, limited pre-due diligence, but there's also a post-due diligence process, which is each of the organizations that accepts our funds has to report to us on a quarterly basis progress against the things that they said they were going to do. Part of that is accountability. Part of it is actually, for our community, the satisfaction of knowing that the work is actually getting done on an ongoing basis. But that is, I think that's an important note that Ignacio's comment raised for me. In terms of the manipulation of information, I shared this with Ignacio, I'm very confident that our voting process and our technology is sacrosanct, that we feel like we've basically created checks and triggers in our system to identify if the system is being manipulated or rigged. And votes are served up randomly, so it's not as if people can choose what they vote on. So in that respect, I feel reasonably confident. What I feel worried about, and I'll just own it, and I don't have a terrific solution to it, and what we've experienced just a little bit in the last few rounds is that there are people who are they're acting as trolls, this activity of trolling in social media, and so they're, I would say, scaring some of our members, or creating an environment that feels a little threatening. I think sometimes they're spreading misinformation. And we've talked a lot about different ways to handle that. One way is we could actually use some of the organizations from our current round to sort of check or fact check the work that's being done. We could use peer review to upvote and downvote in the way that Reddit does in its communities. But I think our recent growth forces us to grapple with that in a much more urgent way. I don't want to suggest that we're in the same category as Facebook, but I think we're an organization like Facebook that's just contending with this new world and trying to figure out how it works. I think Facebook had a lot more time to figure it out than we have, but we still have to do it fast. There's no question about it. It's a real concern. Yeah.
Hi. It's not a question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. There is one more after.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. It's my fault.
Hi. Just wanted to ask sort of quite simple questions. The model way that you have are essentially you give the pool of money to a different organization each month. Mm-hmm. What's the thinking behind that? Because people that might be a regular giver to, say, an existing charity would then, the charity has a sort of ongoing pool of money coming in, which allows them to make long-term plans, to make all sorts of projects. I think from the point of view of an organization, it can be quite hard to receive a one-off thing and then not have further. So you're actually sort of disrupting the other models. I wonder what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, our thinking is that it's a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that actually what we'll be doing for organizations is we'll be exposing new audiences to their work in the rounds that they take part in. So new people will become aware of what they're doing, and that could create potential funding opportunities. And also that because the micro donation is so small, so it's $2 or $5 a month, that this shouldn't be a replacement for other giving. Actually, it should be almost a separate experience or activity where people get the satisfaction of more clout or more growth. And it's something we'll test, I think as the work unfolds. But that's been the hypothesis going in.
There is a question over there, and then...
Yeah. Hi. It's more a comment than a question, but I do it perhaps because of your point on the young people under 18 not voting. In the United States, the problem is that also people over 18 do not vote.
Yeah,
So
that's
my
right.
question is, I mean, what I perceive from what you say is that you give a major emphasis, if you want, on sort of not supranational democracy, but rather supranational activism. There is a tendency among supranationalists to ignore the institutional aspect. That's wrong. I come from the law, and I think that's why I have a constitutionalist approach. But Bernie Sanders made a big mess and lost in the popular vote, and this might have led also to other implications. So my question is, what is your view of trying to revive, if you want, the traditional indirect democracy at a different level? It might be that indirect representative democracy failed. I mean, I assume that it has failed up till now, or at least it looks like failing, but the alternative is not to create a sort of global internet populocracy, but it is trying to create a more institutionalized supranational system. Have you been thinking on these lines? Thanks.
Yeah, I guess should I take the other question first, or?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
The micro is moving this way.
Okay. So I would say my philosophy and my experience, the work that I've done in my career, the through line has been implementation and dissemination of effective practice. How do we take interventions and models that are known to work and broadly implement them? So my mindset, I suppose, is one of how do we get started on testing new things and putting them into practice. So I'm fascinated by visions of true supranational democracy, new forms of governance, some of the things that are in the materials we received about international parliamentary organizations. That to me is thrilling, and that's the future that I would want to see. I think what Shared Nation is it's an attempt first to democratize philanthropy, but then I think if it grows big enough, it could be something that builds in younger people a joy and an interest in their community and their world, and an activism that might translate into voting activism. I mean, I don't see the experience that young people are getting out of this now as being incompatible with voting in the midterm elections in November. And if I did, I'd stop doing it, because I feel those midterm elections are obviously much more important and influential in the world in the near term than anything that we could do.
The last question.
Really good. I'm certainly hoping that in some way we're able to not only work with the implementation piece, but also the incredible educational awareness piece here that's so important to civic action. And if we're talking supranational, we have a bridge to build to get there of engaged citizenry, right? So we have the global citizen movement, but one of the things I love about this is that I have found that there's clarity through engagement, that the action helps bring the clarity. And so it's so important that we get a chance to see what happens, the afterlife, and the impact of those dollars are coming back to that community, so we get smart fast, because we have a ways to go together. And I think it all is this arc, Susanna, toward that supranational, and could also be one of those pillars at some point in terms of inclusion. You asked a question about donor money. Wow, I work with donors all the time. I can see why they would want to get in. And there could be ways, maybe capping those numbers and all of that, but the first question I would have is, as you say, that thought process that might change your minds. what would go toward operating expenses, if anything, or salaries that might, cause the organization to want those donor dollars to come in. I would look at that very carefully because obviously that sets up downfall. So that's my add-on to that. But if you have any mechanisms in place for that learning to come full circle, that's what I want to hear more about.
That's great. Well, that sounds like great advice. And
yeah, just a comment, not a question. I just want to say, build a little on what Myra says. What I find very exciting in what you're saying is that it's, to me, I hear it's an exercise for the demos, basically. And I'm much less interested in the charitable outcome. I'm much more interested in how do, from my psychological perspective, how do we actually combat apathy, particularly in the young, and it's, and it's their world. And it fits quite nicely with some of the things that Simpol is reaching for. And so that the kids can get in and experience making a choice and win, it's a win-win. So for me, it's far more important than the charitable thing, just that exercise. So appreciate you for that.
Thanks, thank you. I just want to say thank you for that feedback, and there's certainly some questions and challenges that I think we're still grappling with, and I appreciate that, and also appreciate the ideas and encouragement too. So thank you very much.